Hello, this is Chaplain Paul, and I decided to make a video that talks about what happened to my parents and why I am who I am today. One of the major reasons, one of the main reasons why I became a healthcare activist. Well, there's a lot of information, and I only have like 15 minutes. That's Sonny over there. Got in trouble. He peed on the floor. So, but that's okay. Give him a pass. You see Sonny in the crate there? The door's not shut. He can leave whenever he wants. Okay, so back in 1990, well, my mother had Crohn's disease. All right, her name was Patricia. My dad, Paul. Um, I'm Paul Jr. My mother, growing up, she developed Crohn's disease at a young age, and back then they did horrible things to her for treatment that made matters worse. She was born in 1932 on October 19th, 1932. My dad was born on August 12th, 1925. All right. So um, in the 60s, she had to have an operation to put a colostomy bag in, which was a series of operations that had her going in and out of the hospital for like at least 4 months. I was adopted I'm born in 1962. I was adopted uh, 2 months after I was born. I was born in October, and the adoption went through in by Christmas. So I was their Christmas present, and they were mine. And the following year, my mom had to go in for the series of operations, and that may have cost her her life. And but you see, God is in control. His timing is always perfect. And and if they had not adopted me when they did, I never would have been adopted by my mother and father. So what happened? Well, I can imagine a lot of people, family, doctors, friends saying, why don't you just wait till after the operation and then adopt? But what my parents knew and what everybody else didn't know was God was in control. His timing is always perfect because God had to line up everything perfectly for it to go down the way it did. Anyway, the following year, my mom went to the hospital. I stayed with I was eating some popcorn, excuse me. I stayed with my grandparents in Rye, New York. We're from Stamford, Connecticut. I stayed with them. So now my mother and father adopt me, and within 6 months or less, I'm now living at my grandparents' house. And my poor father, he would go to work, then he would go to Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City, which is about 45 miles away. And then he would go to Rye, New York to see me and then go home to an empty house for how long? I don't know, 4 months. That must have been very difficult. You just adopt your son, and now he's living at your in laws, and your wife is fighting for her life in a hospital in New York, and you come home to an empty house every day. Uh, Again, they had faith that God was in control and see him through, see us fight our family through it. So eventually, we moved to Phoenix, Arizona in 1976 because of a series of events, one of which was my mom's health. Um, and so moving out here, the air was cleaner and it's not as cold. And it was at the time it was good for your health to move out here, especially if you have asthma, because there's less humidity. My mom didn't have asthma, but it was good for her health that she moved out here. Anyway, so we moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, and then in 1990, as a matter of fact, see, when my mom was released from Mount Sinai Hospital, it was JFK's funeral, and my dad went and picked her up, and they were driving through Manhattan, and it was a ghost town, and they got to Rye, New York, and they and my mom they sat my mom on the couch, and I came walking around the corner from the playroom or the bedroom where I was, where I was staying. And that was the first time my mom saw me walk. I learned to walk at my grandparents' house because back then you couldn't have children go in the hospital. I remember when my mom had other operations, I'd be standing out in the snow with my grandmother waving to my mom, who was like on the third or fourth floor. They didn't allow children into the hospital back then. Um, so in 1994, my my mother's sister died. Her only sister Alice, my aunt Alice, who was my godmother, she died. They lived in White Plains, New York, and moved up to Maine, Costco, Maine. And my aunt died. And my grandmother at that time, because my grandfather died in 1979, was coming here like a snowbird. She would fly out here and stay the winter months and then go home for Easter. So she'd come out here for Christmas and then go home for Easter to Maine. And my aunt died, so my dad and my grandmother had to fly to Maine, and they were snowed in, so the plane had to fly and land in Boston. They had to spend the night in Boston. They were late for the funeral. My dad came home with pneumonia, and then 2 weeks later, my mom was losing weight, not feeling well, and she went into the hospital in Scottsdale. And 3 days later, she went into full respiratory failure um, because they had not given her. They forgot to give her one of her medications she'd been on for 30 years. Librium, I believe, or I forgot what the medication was, but her body went into shock and went into full respiratory failure. And they had 12 IVs coming out of her. They drugged her unconscious, put her on a ventilator. They have to put you into an induced coma back then when they put you on a ventilator because of the trauma of it. And had her hands tied to the bed. There was blood trickling out of the side of her mouth. Meanwhile, my dad uh, was dealing with prostate cancer. I was on probation, and all hell broke loose. Um, on the same day, my nephew Kevin Jr. was born premature. His mother was put into an induced coma because of complications with childbirth and had to be air evac down to John C. Lincoln or Children's Hospital. I think Children's Hospital. Um, Fighting for his life, put on a ventilator. So you had my mom and my nephew put on a ventilator on the same day. On the same day, my mom and my nephew are on a ventilator. My mom's fighting for her life. My nephew, they said he might not even make the flight, so they took pictures of him. That's standard procedure because they thought he wasn't going to make the flight to the Children's Hospital, and he's fine. He served in the uh, uh, Air National Guard, Arizona Air National Guard. He also served in the Air Force for 6 years. So we're very proud of my nephew. Um, so that started 4 years of living hell for my family. The doctors lied to us. My mother and father were basically raped, ripped off, lied to, and taken advantage of by a broken healthcare system. My dad winds up dying before my mom in 1996. My grandmother died in 1997, and my mom died in 1998. And through it all, my family went through a living hell. Like I said, the doctors lied to us. They wanted to put my mother in a nursing home, and we put our foot down and said no. Uh, as a matter of fact, I was friends with Channel 12 News. Sean Cooney was a friend of mine back in the day. His father was the CEO at Channel 12 News. And I said, if they put my mom in a nursing home prematurely, can you have a news crew at our house? I'm going to be on the roof with a shotgun so that we could draw attention to the situation. It was all lined up. But it didn't go down because I got in contact with the National Healthcare Committee in Washington, D.C., and they sent me a banner and I put it on the wall in the room. And they basically crapped their pants and did their job. They weaned my mom off the ventilator and then sent her home. They sent her home prematurely. And then for the next few years, my mom would go into the hospital because of breathing attacks. By then, we got directives that said, do not resuscitate. And even with the directives in my hand, we would go in and there's different shifts, different crews at the emergency uh, part of the hospital, and they would test my mom and see that her breathing levels were really high, but she was used to it. But see, their graph shows that when your breathing levels are that high, that you have to be put on a ventilator. And I had the directives in my hand, and I would say, call the doctor, call the doctor, call the effing doctor, and they would call the doctor and come back and apologize because they were wrong. You have to have those direct. Just because you have that piece of paper doesn't mean anything. You got to stand on it and demand that they follow rule. Just because there's a piece of paper that don't say resuscitate doesn't mean that they're gonna honor that. What if they don't know it's in the room? That's why you have to have a strong patient's advocate by our family member's side to make sure that medical errors, to prevent medical errors that kill, that take the lives of over 440,000 people a year die because of a preventable medical mistake. 440,000 with 10,000 serious injuries a day in hospitals alone. That's 1,100 people a day. All right. If you take into consideration nursing homes, care centers, and medical rehabs, those numbers could be 1 million people a year. All the more reason to be in there by our loved one's side. Not only that, you got to have the directives, just like the Constitution. Constitution ain't worth nothing unless we're willing to stand up and fight and to defend our rights. Otherwise, it's not worth nothing. Okay. What do you think? These patients that are in these facilities that are all alone, no family members, that are being horribly treated. Their constitutional rights are being violated. Their civil rights are being violated. Their human rights are being violated, and their patients' rights are being violated. But if you don't have any family, then nobody's going to come running out of the woodwork. No one's going to parachute in and say, "Hey, you're violating this person's rights, so you better cool it." No. If there's no one to defend those rights, you don't have any rights. That's why if you're in a coma and you got no family support or semi-coma or you're on life support or you're paralyzed and you have no family support, you ain't got no rights. You could say, I have the right to X, Y, and Z, and if the staff listens, great. But if they don't listen, there's very little you can do. A lot of people don't even know what to do. They don't know to call the ombudsman, which is a joke, or call, Adult Protective Services, which is a joke, or call the long-term care licensing department, which is a joke, or call your civil rights division of your state, which is a joke, or get an attorney, which is probably the best thing to do. But how are you going to get an attorney if you're laying paralyzed in the bed with no family support? You're not going to do it. So the only way you can defend your rights is, well, to know your rights and to know who to contact if they're violated and to stand up and fight for them. Anyway, so this started 4 years. So I got involved with the Alliance with Retired Americans, the Alliance for Retired Americans, and became a healthcare activist and got out there and protested George W. Bush's Medicare prescription drug bill, which was a sham. It promised to save seniors 80% on their prescription drug costs. It gave you a card, but the deal is that the pharmaceuticals raised their prices 80 to 100, 500% a year. And so the first year you save a little money, the second year you save a little money. By the third year, you're behind the eight ball because they just keep raising the prices to cover that savings. So you wind up with bananas, and this is what millions. Not only that, to make the cards cost millions of dollars. Um, we hijacked a, uh, a rally down at the state capitol. There was supposed to be 5 busloads of seniors coming to a rally at the state capitol in support of that bill, and they never showed up. Our group was there, like 20 of us, with our signs saying, "This is a sham. This is a sham." Um, JD Hayworth was there, and his face looked like it was going to pop because it was an embarrassment. We were there protesting. Nobody showed up. Tom Scully, he was the head of Medicare, he was there, and I chased him down. I didn't know who he was. And then when he identified himself, I said, "Hey, look, what if your mom had to sell her house to pay her medical expenses? How would she feel?" And he said, "Well, Paul, I'd have to sit her down and tell her the truth. It's for the best. If I had a pie, I would have thrown it in his face." The guy's a scumbag. Okay. Um, After the bill was signed, he got a high-paying job for a pharmaceutical company as a lobbyist. And I called Washington, the Medicare. I called their executive staff, and I said, if another person like Tom Scully gets to be the head of Medicare, I'm going to fly to Washington. You have to drag me out of your office. And I was yelling at him over the phone because the head of Medicare has the trust of millions of seniors. And if you're going to put somebody in there like Tom Scully that's just out to make a buck and to do what the administration says at the expense of these people, then we don't want people like that. We don't. That's what's the problem with the government now. So uh, I was involved with them, and then I eventually became a chaplain in long-term care ministry, and I've seen horrific things that nobody should have to go through. Patients lied to, ripped off, taken advantage of, patients waiting all night to be changed, patients dealing with E. coli, MRSA, bed sores, rashes, infections, bloody blisters, and other serious complications that land them in ICU and straight in the grave, people that I love, that I've watched waste away and die because state agencies don't do a damn thing. This is what's happening in our country, in our state. Not only that, you have a society that sticks their head in the sand, not believing that they're ever going to wind up in these places, and they don't want to. They don't want to even address these atrocities because they're too horrific. Nobody wants to talk about dying. Nobody wants to talk about being in a nursing home. So it gets worse and worse and worse because nobody is making sure that these people are being cared for properly. Well, I'm making sure, and there's others. And so I'm almost out of time. Remember, Jesus loves you, and so do I. That's just a little bit of the story. My family went through 4 years of living hell. We almost lost our family home. That's another thing. Medicare recovery. Okay, the dirt wasn't even dry in the grave, and they were trying to recoup the 4 years of state aid that they gave my mother, and that took a lot of legal maneuvers to be able to save our family home. Anyway, there's more to the story. There's Sonny right there. Remember, Jesus loves you. So do I.